Hello, and welcome to Good Game Pocket Edition, your weekly roundup of all things gaming for gamers by gamers. I'm Barjo.
And I'm Hex. This week we see a younger and more reckless Batman in Arkham Origins.
You're not some hardened vigilante. You're a young man with a trust fund and too much anger.
A new Batman so exciting, Hex, but before all that, we have a new comic book adaptation to have a look at. The Wolf Among Us is based on the Fables comic series, which sees a New York populated with gritty versions of classical fairy tale characters like Snow White and Ichabod Crane. You play Big B Wolf, famous for his former huffing and puffing habit, but now he's reformed and has become the sheriff of Fabletown, who finds himself stumped by a difficult murder case. And so begins your adventure.
And what great work you do, Sheriff.
This chapter, titled Faith, is the first of 5 which will be released over the next few months, and I think this is a really good setup to a world I'm keen to spend more time in. There's even a plot point which I didn't see coming.
Yeah, me neither. I do struggle with the mechanics in these kinds of games, though.
Let's not overcomplicate things.
That fixed camera position and the interaction wheel and all those quick time events do frustrate me at times, but I thought the performances were really strong, and Telltale is definitely getting better at balancing interactivity and storytelling.
You're not as bad as everyone says you are.
I gave it 7 out of 10.
It was 8.5 from me. Next, we became oddly attached to a group of baby badgers. Shelter is an indie game about keeping a family of badgers safe. As the mother, you'll need to keep your 5 babies healthy and well fed. At first, you gleefully frolic about the fields, sniffing out veggies, rodents, and frogs for your young'uns to eat. But life's not all a walk in the park for these guys. Baby badgers have the misfortune of looking rather tasty to predators.
I was surprised at how much I cared for those little badgerlings. You can run quite quickly, but the babies struggle to keep up, and keeping them safe from predators is pretty challenging. And Hex, the moment you lose that first one, it's just gut-wrenching, isn't it?
It's awful. I was crying, no, I'm so sorry, I failed you. Even still though, I loved every moment. I loved the protective nature it brought out in me. I loved caring for my little cubs and the relief that you get when you turn around and see them following along behind you. Plus the visuals and sound design perfectly complemented the experience. I gave it 8.5.
It was 8 from me, and now it's time to catch them all again. The Pokemon X and Y games mark one of the biggest leaps we've seen from the handheld franchise. Lapsed fans like myself will appreciate the presence of classic Gen 1 Pokemon, but it's the technical elements that are more important. For starters, this is the first time we've seen 3D character models for our Pokemon. It's also the first time we've been freed from the grid and allowed to walk diagonally. I know these features might seem like no-brainers, but Hex, it's the bump it needed to pull this game out of the 90s.
Yeah, it's good to see that these games are a lot less grindy now too. They've streamlined the inventory system and buffed up the XP share, which gives all of your Pokemon experience points from battles. Some people would argue that it makes the game a bit too easy, but it sure beats running around in circles for 2 hours before taking on a gym leader.
There's so much they get right with this. However, the stereoscopic 3D feature is only implemented for some of the game, and it does tend to frame up the action, which is disappointing. But if you keep that graphics slider on 2D, it still looks great. I do think there's a few things they could still streamline, especially with the menus, but this is a huge step forward for the franchise, and I gave it 9.
Once again, I gave it 8.5. We also had a look at a handful of smartphone games. The best of the bunch was Monster Meltdown. This touchscreen puzzler sees the unlucky janitor Yuri rounding up a bunch of escaped monsters. The aggressive ones will chase him relentlessly while the timid ones will run away. Armed with this knowledge, plus a handy teleporter, Yuri can zap around the levels, herding them up.
The game's real challenge comes from the level layout. You'll find plenty of tough spots like doors you can only open by getting a monster to trigger a switch or power a generator.
I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I found myself going for all the extra challenges, like doing levels with a tiny number of teleports. Plus, it's a free game without microtransactions. I gave it 8.
I gave it 8.5. Sadly, we don't have any real teleporters, so we're going to have to walk to the Ask Good Game desk and answer some questions, Hex.
I think I can handle that. That's a crawl.
Good game.
All right, this week our question comes from Anonymous in Perth, Western Australia.
Why do you guys hate Nintendo? You guys keep saying that they make the same games over and over again and give their gamers lower scores, which is true in a way. But why don't you say that about Sony and Microsoft? Come on, Call of Duty, Final Fantasy, Ratchet & Clank, Metal Gear, the list goes on. Stop hating Nintendo. Seriously, they're no different from the other companies. Well, Anonymous, I think we should start by saying that we absolutely do not hate Nintendo. Some of my all-time best gaming memories are from Nintendo games, and the gaming world would be a much poorer place without them. They have a history of delivering amazing game experiences.
Yeah, and just recently we gave Pikmin 3 and 9 and 8.5. We both gave Luigi's Mansion 8.5 and double 8s for Paper Mario Sticker Star. Hardly low scores. I think really the only games we've been harsh on for lack of originality have been the new Super Mario Bros. Series, which, while they're pretty solid games, they've just lacked a bit of the creativity that we crave from Ninty games.
Yes, and as for those games you mentioned, well, in fairness to Microsoft and Sony, the only game there that's actually a Microsoft or Sony franchise is Ratchet & Clank. Otherwise, those are all made by third-party developer studios. And in their defense, I think Final Fantasy games changed quite a bit from game to game, for better or worse, but at least they changed. And Metal Gear games can hardly be said to lack originality. We've certainly dinged recent COD games for being samey as well.
And I think it's fair to call out Microsoft for a lack of originality in recent years. They've just been cycling through Halo, Gears of War, Fable, and Forza games for ages. But I think at least going into next gen, they've got a few interesting things brewing, like Quantum Break. And they say out of 15 exclusive games coming out next year, 8 of them are brand new IPs. So they're picking up their game a bit, I think.
Yeah, and personally I think Sony deserves some credit for investing in plenty of new IPs and interesting games as well. Things like Beyond and Heavy Rain, Journey, and The Last of Us, for example. Speaking specifically about Mario though, for me those games really live or die on their level design. So if they don't nail that, then it just feels like I've been there and done that, and maybe even done it better. And that's kind of how I felt playing the last few Mario games. And while there are many beautiful games on the Wii, overall visually, it didn't quite hold up to its competition last generation. And I'm a little bit concerned about the Wii U on that front too, moving into the next gen, to be brutally honest.
Yes, but we'll have to wait and see before we can make a proper comparison. Anyway, I think it's time to hand over our reviewing pants to the viewers and get stuck into your review. And since we mentioned it before, how about we see what people thought of Beyond Two Souls? They're coming.
Good idea, Hex, and it has been quite divisive. Blue here writes, best game I have ever played, or at the very least, for the year. 10 out of 10.
Likewise, Kui simply wrote, amazing. 10 out of 10. And we've actually got a couple of monster reviews that we'll cut down a little bit, but Neurotoxic says, holy guacamole, how could so many people rate this game 10 out of 10? I'll admit the story was interesting overall, but spoiled by lack of an overall genre and countless stupid moments. The dialogue between the minor characters was often predictable, cliche, or at times downright atrocious. Overall, I thought this game had more positive than negative aspects to it, but only just 5.5 stars.
But our old friend H.2 weighed in with his own lengthy review, writing, something went off in my mind when you guys reviewed this game and gave it moderate scores. I screamed at the TV when that happened, for this is the greatest game to come out this year. This is the first game in years that has moved me to tears and gripped me like this. It's brilliant, it's the perfect game, it's a masterpiece, and it's my game of the year. 10 out of 10.
Not bad.
Well, I think it's always good when a game inspires that kind of passion, but on that note, I think it's back to the studio for us.
All right, let's go.
Good game.
Batman is a complex superhero, and his long and dark journey has been explored in so many different ways. But at the core of Batman is that symbiotic struggle with the Joker, and in Batman Arkham Origins, they get to start that very dance.
Nice of you to drop in.
Origins is a prequel. Batman has only been on the job for 2 years. He's undisciplined, angry, unforgiving, and unwilling to compromise.
You want to see what 250 beats per minute feels like?
The core gameplay hasn't changed a great deal on the surface, but it feels a lot more refined. Batman's counters are as sophisticated as ever, and it's such a joy watching him flip about seamlessly through big fights. And it felt like there were more of those double counters where you take out 2 goons at once. I'm still wowed by how reactive those animations are, and I really like that you have so many gadgets to start with. There's more of a focus on detective work too.
This bullet was fired from a revolver. Ballistics analysis indicates a low angle of trajectory.
You'll reconstruct a scene and try to figure out what's happened. It only occurs a handful of times in the main story, but it's a fun storytelling mechanic, and I hope future games explore this detective side of Bats a little bit more.
Yeah, me too. It must be hard to balance action with puzzles and things like that in a game like this. But it's a good mix. There were a few confusing level design issues though, and I did get a bit sick of going into detective vision so much, and I think maybe slightly more obvious level design cues might be a better way for the series to go. But I like that you're not always presented with the answer, and you do have to look around a bit. For me, this was all about the Joker. There are some truly incredible moments with him as a young, fresh, and completely insane villain.
You of all people should know.
Also new to the franchise is multiplayer. It's Joker's gang versus Bane's gang versus the dynamic duo Batman and Robin. A 3 versus 3 versus 2 matchup brought to us by developer Splash Damage, who are known for the Enemy Territory series. It's a dark game mode, but it needs to be because when you're playing as Batman or Robin, you need to rely on the shadows to survive and pick your targets carefully. There's unlocks and gadgets and many takedown strategies to play with on all sides. I liked it, Hex. It's not something I'll come back to a lot, but at least it's not tacked on. It feels balanced and thought out.
Origins does play it pretty safe on the single-player side of things, but, you know, there's no series exhaustion, and I think they've done a fantastic job of dealing with the important Batman subject matter. And it was good to be back doing that signature Batman strut, so I gave it 8.5.
I'm just so happy that it's not a stopgap or filler game. This is a Batman chapter in its own right, and I gave it 9.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Good game.
Well, that's all we could cram into our pockets for this week, but don't forget you can catch regular episodes of Good Game every Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. on ABC2.
And next week, Pirates, Hex, Pirates! In Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag.
Let's hear the roar of this beast.
Oh, I can't wait to do some epic pirate ship battles in the high seas.
Me too. Until then, Bajo out.
Hex out.